Amazing. We're live. Welcome everyone to another episode of React Native Live. This is episode 12. I'm really excited to have you on the show, Danny. It was nice seeing you or like meeting you in person for the first time like 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it's always really great to go to these events and meet people that you've sort of crossed paths with only online.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was at App.js in Krakow, Poland. Well, Danny, thank you for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
for having me.
yeah, while everyone logs on, go ahead and let us know where you're joining in from. Obviously, I'll go first. I'm Mazen Chami, and I live in Durham, North Carolina. And I'll be your host for today. And I'm excited to kind of talk about all things, everything Storybook with you, Danny. And, as we begin, where are you joining us from, Danny?
Yeah, so I'm joining from Porto, in Portugal, and yeah, I've been here the last like 7 years, but I'm not originally from Portugal.
Okay.
I have this whole
Yeah,
background story that always end up going through. But yeah, I originally grew up in the UK,
cool.
but I'm here in Porto.
Awesome. What brought you to Portugal, if you don't mind me asking?
I actually met my wife in Brazil, and this was before we got married, and she was the one that wanted to move to Portugal.
Okay.
Um, and I was just like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of good things about Portugal, so might have to check it out at some
Yeah,
point.
definitely. I always encourage everyone to come. I say, look, I've got my list of restaurants and cafes.
Yeah,
So whenever you come down to Porto, whoever comes down, just like shoot me a message and I'll either I'll come with
that's
you
awesome.
and we can go check out somewhere cool, or I'll just send you my list.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. I assume the weather now that it's summer, it's a little bit warm or warmer, right?
Yeah, it's getting pretty nice actually. We have a little garden here, and it's
Mm.
always really nice in the morning. Have a bit
Yeah.
of coffee, sit out in the sun. It's getting really, really nice.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I asked you before we started to like tell me an interesting fact about yourself or like something interesting that you're into other than tech, and coffee was what you said. Tell me
Yeah.
more. Tell me more about your coffee
I
obsession
yeah.
or love. What is
Hmm.
it?
Interesting. Yeah, I think what you said was like, or what I said was, does coffee count as a hobby?
Yeah, it
Because for
does.
me, it really, yeah, I mean, for me, it really is a hobby because I spend time on it every day. I mean,
Hmm.
making the coffee more than, anything else. But I also, yeah, I think we're like with anything, there's like levels to it, right? Like I
Yeah.
like to sort of say that I'm an aspiring coffee nerd
Okay.
because I know people that are like way beyond my sort of level of coffee nerdism. But yeah, I'm
Nerdism.
really into basically just like finding nice, especially like local coffee roasters and like finding like good coffees that they have.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is this one called Klein, and it's just like this one. There's two guys. Well, one nice lady from Colombia and one guy from Brazil, and they make Colombian coffee.
Okay.
And I think Colombian coffee for me is like the best coffee you can buy. And theirs is like the best one I've tried in Porto.
Okay.
And maybe anywhere so far, but there's always so many different kinds. Like when you get really
Yeah.
into it,
Is it
the rabbit
Kern?
hole is deep.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Is it Kern?
Yeah.
Kern?
The name of the coffee thing?
Yes.
Yeah,
The
it's
Colombian one. Oh,
CLA. And if you were gonna Google it, it's called like Clan Coffee Roasters, I believe, the
okay.
website,
Cool.
which I should know because I helped them a bit with their website.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Cloud Coffee Roasters.
but
Nice.
yeah, they're good friends of mine. They do a really good job. I guess the website might have changed, but
Uh-oh. You might need to
that's
get
not
them
it.
back. Yeah. Coffee is always an interesting one, right? I feel like,
Yeah.
infinite.red, one thing that we always do during our annual retreat is we try to, so I think just a quick, once a year we get together for a week at a retreat somewhere, mainly on the West Coast. And during the week, we have a little time carved out where we do a coffee exchange. Essentially, bring coffee from your local area that
Mm,
um, that you've tried or you really like, or there's a nice story behind it. And we exchange it.
nice.
You mention you bring your coffee, we put it on, then we kind of take turns picking the coffee based on what was described, right? I always usually bring Little Wave Roasters, which is here in Durham, North
Oh,
Carolina, or
nice.
Counterculture is another one. Um, those are usually the ones that I drink, mainly because they're local roasters, and it's always
Mm.
nice to see them when they're roasting them, sort of thing, because it's like a one of the coffee shops, the roaster is there, and it's like a glass wall separating
Oh, that's cool.
the area versus all that. Yeah, yeah. And I believe this one is Colombian. I could be wrong, not exactly sure, but there's that.
Best
And I'll
coffee.
actually give a fun fact. Yeah, a
Mm.
fun fact about myself, one that I didn't really come to like my mind until I got much older and started drinking coffee more. But my grandfather on my mom's side was actually a coffee bean trader over in Lebanon, and I didn't realize that. And we would always go to his like coffee bean warehouse and run around and stuff like that.
Oh,
And
wow.
it never really hit me up until I got older and started drinking coffee. I was like, oh yeah, that was a coffee bean warehouse sort of thing. Yeah,
Nice. Yeah, that's
yeah.
cool. I mean, I didn't really grow up around a lot of coffee stuff in my childhood. Like I don't know if you know about like how in England it's
It's
all
tea time.
tea.
Yeah,
Yeah, like yeah, we always and a lot of people are drinking like soluble coffee, like just mix in the water
instant. Okay, yeah,
and
instant coffee.
yeah, instant coffee and like I think back to how I used to drink that all the time and I can't imagine that
Yeah,
anymore. It's funny. It's one of those things like once you go in the deep end, you can't like come back out.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a very good way of putting it. And especially like I think you mentioned this how you do it. We start doing the pour overs and you weigh
Yeah.
everything. There's so many mechanisms to do it, right?
Mm.
I want to do
It's the
French
daily
press.
ritual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that. Well, for our listeners or anyone, we haven't started yet. I'm starting to see people kind of log on and all that. We're talking about coffee. So if you're on the West Coast, probably grab your coffee. Or if you're in Europe and you like to have coffee after dinner, well, dinner is usually later in Europe. So yeah, grab a drink of your choice at this point, and we'll be starting here soon. So Denny, I think if you don't mind introducing yourself to our listeners and our audience, how did you get to where you're at now? And kind of give us that, the Danny journey.
Interesting. Like the whole backstory?
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. I guess so like I said, I grew up in the UK. And actually I was born in Germany and after like a year or so we moved to England and I spent most of my life in England. I went to university near London, actually in
Okay.
Surrey, but anyone outside of the UK probably doesn't know what that is.
Mhm.
But it's a nice little area near London, and I studied computer science. I think I like for programming I had a pretty like what's the I don't know if it's standard is the right word, but maybe like the more prescribed routes to
Yeah.
programming. I went through like university and then did like an internship and just like went through the normal
Yeah.
process. Though, after I graduated university, I actually started working in DevOps rather than, like I didn't
Okay.
touch JavaScript really until I went to Brazil, which is kind of like the next part of that
Mm,
story. So, yeah, I used to do DevOps for a company called what's it called? TUI, or Thomson UK, if any English
okay.
people out there. And but TUI is like the global travel company, and yeah, like that was pretty fun. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done much DevOps work, but it's kind of just like playing around with like scripts, and
Yeah.
you basically just have like a bunch of machines at your disposal. Uh, it's serious business, but at the same time, it feels like fun for a computer like nerd, right?
Yeah.
So you learn about like Linux, and you're just like shell scripting, writing Python, and like digging into all kinds of automation. Eventually, like wasn't really for me though,
Okay.
because I think that like I guess the thing is I missed coding. Like I used when I was on my internship, I was coding. I was actually doing Java and Java Spring,
Okay.
and I think Angular started to get introduced, but that was like way back when it was like first probably becoming a thing. Maybe it was like
Okay.
0 dot something, but I
Mm-hmm.
barely touched that. I mean, back then, I don't know if you had this experience, but back then I think everyone just kind of hated JavaScript, and like front end development wasn't what it is today.
Yeah.
And like it was a totally different beast, and I couldn't really stand it. And so like DevOps was more my style back then, but then from there, I had this sort of weird, I had this like urge to go to Brazil and like
Okay.
get to know some of my mother's side. So I didn't mention it, but my mother's Brazilian. So basically, I've always sort of visited Brazil throughout, like as I was like growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and I have some family there, quite a lot of family in Brazil. Like my mother's side, the family is huge. And I always really liked visiting Brazil. And so after I got really tired of like waking up in the middle of the night to do DevOps deployments and like all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I just started thinking about what else I could do, and I ended up going to live with a cousin of mine in Brazil, and I didn't speak any Portuguese, um, or like really know what to expect from it. But I ended up in Curitiba, which is in the south of Brazil.
Okay.
And yeah, we lived a little bit like in the suburbs of of Curitiba. It was a pretty cool time actually. I worked for a little startup in Brazil, and I made like just sort of standard salary in Brazil, which, I in a lot of ways it was a big downgrade in salary. It's something you don't normally do, right? Like in a
Mm-hmm.
career, you don't like usually try and always go up. But I really went there more to like have a different experience, right? Like,
Yeah.
and there I was doing Ruby on Rails, so I
Okay.
think there's probably some overlap with what some of the infinite.red guys were doing back then. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but I heard that I think Jamin was doing Rails, and some
Mm-hmm.
other guys.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went through that journey as well with even CoffeeScript,
There you
if
go.
you can remember that
Full
one.
circle. Coffee coming back in the story. Nice. I love it.
True, true. And that's really where my my love for coffee started in Brazil, to be honest, because it's
Okay.
a lot more of a coffee culture in Brazil than there is in the UK. Like
Okay.
basically, everyone's drinking it all the time. The thing with Brazil though is that people like drink coffee before bed. Like they don't
Yeah.
have limits.
I could never do that.
Uh, like if you go to a shop as well in Brazil, and they'll like pretty much any shop you walk into, they'll have like these like big thermos flasks of coffee already mixed with sugar, because a
Okay.
lot of people like to drink quite a lot of sugar with their coffee in Brazil, and they'll just give you this little cup like this, and you can just keep filling it up.
Okay.
Uh, it's like something I never saw outside of Brazil, but it's like coffee on tap everywhere you go,
Hmm.
basically.
Like a coffee shot
Yeah.
on tap. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, so I guess carrying on from there, like I did that Ruby on Rails for like 6 months, and then I spent like a month traveling in Brazil. And after that, I actually went back to DevOps again,
Okay.
because I went back to the UK. And but soon after that, I realized like I wanted to go back to Brazil. I kind of hated being back in the UK after I got back. Like
Okay.
one big thing is I missed the food, I missed the weather. I just couldn't go back after that, like after experiencing the warm weather. Yeah, and I remember just this cold winter in the UK where like I was standing at the bus stop. I was commuting to work like an hour and I was just waiting in the snow and the wind was like blowing in my face. And
Yeah.
I was thinking like, yeah, I want to go back to Brazil. This is crazy. And so yeah, I went back again, but this time I that's when I decided I want to learn React Native actually,
Okay.
which is a weird like connection there. But in my mind, I had like listened to some podcast with Dan Abramov, weirdly
Okay.
enough, and I think it was like Software Engineering Daily or something a long time ago. But yeah, he made a really good case for React Native. And this is for someone that didn't really write JavaScript, didn't really know much about like front end. But like the way that he spoke about it, I think at that time also like web mobile development was becoming like a big thing, like
Hmm.
everyone was starting to install apps and you're just kind of thinking, well, how do I get into that basically?
Yeah.
And yeah, I ended up thinking, well, I kind of need a way to get paid to learn React Native. And I spoke to this friend I made in Brazil, and he said that he would know someone that was like looking for freelancers basically to make like an app, like a mobile app. And I was just like, yeah, like why don't I move in with you? Just like, and I'll just figure it out when we get there. And yeah, so I just moved out to live with a friend in Brazil, and I decided to learn JavaScript and React Native. All kind of because of a podcast that I heard, weirdly enough.
Nice.
But yeah, I remember very well like trying to figure out React, and like Redux at the time was like the big thing as well. Flow had just like been announced or whatever at
Hmm.
the like React Conf, I think it was.
Yeah. So early on,
And
React Native.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it was definitely pretty early. Like I used Expo back then as well. Back
Okay.
when it was just like Expo Go, and like you would have to eject if you wanted to do anything serious. But um I mean obviously it's very different now, but back then I mean it was still pretty amazing to be able to just you know use JavaScript to write a mobile app, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
it just kind of like instantly updated and all that stuff, like, so yeah, I just got really into that for a while. And like I said, I met my wife in Brazil, and I think she was keen to leave Brazil, and she's always wanted to go to Portugal. So yeah, we just sort of I looked for a job. I found a job actually writing Elixir and Vue.js on the front end.
Okay.
So I kind of shifted again, and I was doing more back end than front end at that time. But it's reminded me of the like Rails days, because it was like Elixir has Phoenix,
Hmm.
and it's a very similar setup, right? But yeah, I mean during that time, I also kind of was missing React Native, and then I joined a company, a big sort of betting company, and basically just to do React Native again and to like build a they had like a mobile web app, and they wanted to like bring it to they wanted to kind of reuse a bunch of code and make a mobile app basically.
Hmm.
So I worked for like Paddy Power Betfair.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it turned into like this big company around that time called Flutter, but
Mm.
it's not related at all to the Flutter like mobile technology,
Yeah.
but it's like they own like all of the betting companies
Yeah.
basically. I think there's like two big betting companies, and they're one of them.
Hmm.
And then they dealt with like millions of transactions and stuff like that. But yeah, we basically started out their mobile app, and that's when I first got introduced to React Native Storybook. So initially, the place where I was working before that, when I just moved to Portugal, I spent like a small time doing kind of consulting for Vue, like Vue.js development. And I went on this one project that had a really nice code base actually. And they were the ones that kind of like turned me onto TypeScript as well,
Okay.
because they were using TypeScript with Vue, and they used Storybook, and they had like a way to like embed Storybook in their app. It was pretty interesting. And that's when I first got introduced to like TypeScript and Storybook. And then like I still had that in my mind. And then when I joined this Paddy Power Betfair, they were trying to set up their like this mobile app, like I said, to like share code, and the
Mhm.
web app had Storybook as well. So they wanted to just kind of mirror that. But if anyone like remembers Storybook from back then, so this would have been, I don't know, like 2015 or something. So
Early.
no, maybe I'm getting that wrong. Not 2015. It would have been like 5, 6 years ago. So
Okay.
it would be like 2020 maybe.
Okay.
Got my numbers way off. But basically, back then it was like version 5.3, and that was when it was kind of in this like middle ground of like being between maintainers, and it just been removed from the main, because it used to be inside the Storybooks like main repo alongside like Storybook React and Vue and everything.
Hmm.
And their reasoning basically for removing it out was that the CI was kind of just like slowing everything down in terms of shipping. And then the maintainer had kind of moved on, and so it just made a lot of sense they basically went like this, okay, we're gonna hand this over to like to the community and see if someone picks it up. And when I
Okay.
was sort of picking it up, well, I was just like learning Storybook basically. And we were running into bugs, and React Native had just like upgraded, I think 65 or something.
Hmm.
And some stuff was breaking in React Native Storybook. And I just kind of went around trying to find out who could help us fix it, basically.
Okay.
And what I usually say is like, if you ask too many questions, you're gonna end up a maintainer, right? So that's kind of what happened to me. Is I just asked around, and eventually they were just like, "Why don't you just take it on yourself?" Basically, and I said, "Well, okay, I guess." Like I don't know what I'm looking at, but you know, I just sort of thought I'd give it a try. I'd always been interested in open source, to be honest. It seems like a sort of mystical thing. I don't know, when you're looking at it like from the outside, I think it seems more glamorous than it really is.
Hmm.
Like it's just kind of people sharing code, It's just like,
That makes sense.
yeah, it's almost like a academic endeavor or something. That's somehow like how I see it. Like it's a technical curiosity for me. Like
Yeah. Well, I
but
kind of want to ask you a question then. Like,
mm,
actually, before we continue, real quick, can you give us like what is Storybook? You've mentioned Storybook a bunch. Like, what is, for our listeners aren't familiar with Storybook? Kind of give us that like longer elevator pitch for Storybook.
sure. Yeah. So Storybook is kind of like this developer toolkit for building components, and especially if you're building a design system, it's probably like the tooling for building out your design system, because what it lets you do is kind of take your component library and display it in a sort of organized way. And then you can like click through all your components and like see the list of them. You can like you basically take components and um, create like what we call stories of each sort of different states of that component. And then when you like go through your list of components, you can kind of just like click through and see what it looks like in every different state that it has. So one example would be like an error state or like a loading state. So maybe you have a button, and then you click on the loading state of that button and it shows a spinner. And then I can like go to the other story and see what it looks like, when it's disabled or something, right? And at the same time, it also has a bunch of like extensions, add-ons is what we call them. And the add-ons let you sort of extend the functionality of Storybook. But there are some add-ons that are now also built in, but are the sort of core add-ons of Storybook, which includes things like controls and actions. And controls is what lets you update the props of your component live. So let's say you're looking at that button and maybe you just like want to quickly see what it would look like if I changed the text in the button. You could open the controls in the add-ons panel, and you can just like type in whatever you want the button to have inside it, and it will just update live for you. You don't need to like change any code or refresh or anything. It just directly changes the properties on that button. So like essentially just giving all these different kind of ways to like look at your components, develop on your components, and just kind of like isolate individual components in like certain states. But alongside that, you can also put in entire screens. You can kind of do whatever you want with Storybook. It's really like the toolkit, like I was saying, that lets you build out your app or design system. I think the most like obvious case is the design system, but it also extends out to just app development in general. If you want to like develop a specific like screen with some set of data, you can also then like add some like mocked response to an API request and see that like screen in that specific state as well with that data.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. That's great. And one thing that I also like to mention about Storybook is most of the time, yes, Storybook could be for us, developers and all that. But I think at the end of the day, most, and tell me if this tracks with you, like most consumers of Storybook are actually, designers and or product teams.
Yeah, so I think that that's true for a lot of teams. I think that there's definitely that use case that I probably missed in my explanation there, which is essentially that you can deploy or like distribute your design system as like an app or a web page, right? Like when we're talking about the web, you can just ship that to the web and then have your designer like see all the components. So let's say that in your development workflow, you go as a developer, take some requirements, the designer's made some design, and then you go through, develop it, and then you push up some PR. Maybe you have like a preview deployment of your Storybook, and then you can send it to the designer and get their approval, or you can, once it's deployed or like merged, maybe you deploy it to a Storybook, like a deployed Storybook, and then you can have your testers check it there. There's all kinds of like different workflows, and I think especially for like bigger teams, I think what you're saying is true, where the main like consumer will be like those designers and product people. But it really depends on like individual teams, I would say, because I think like especially maybe like more faster moving like smaller teams might just kind of be using it in a development workflow, and like it really depends like how far you extend out that like development workflow or like the Storybook workflow, I guess you could call it, to the rest of your team. Because I think it takes a bit of coordination to kind of say like, oh yeah, like okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have like a Storybook with all our components, and then you sort of explain to a designer, okay, we want you to like validate our changes every time we deploy and like check them in Storybook. And then the product, like however much those people want to get involved, they can do it, basically, is what I would say. So like, however your team like needs to work, I think you can kind of do it, basically. But yeah, hopefully that I didn't like go too much of a sidetrack there, but
Not at all. That makes sense. Like, I think one thing, there's a lot of value in Storybook, mainly because, let's talk more from that bigger team perspective where, you want to be fast paced, you want to move quickly, but at the end of the day, you have your designers and product that are always looking out for that user experience, whether it's from an accessibility standpoint or whatnot, right?
yeah.
Building out a story, like maybe even a standalone Storybook app that consumes your components, your I like to call them atoms, like your button, your text, and all that, right? Because there's many, even like your text, right? You probably have a font that's specific to your app. You have
Yeah.
a header text, XYZ, right? How So I guess my then question to you is, what would the pitch be, or how would you frame it to a product team where they're like, well,
Mm.
you know, you're telling me we need to build a second app, we need to maintain a second app, we need to maintain our storybook. What's the value in there for us? Like, how would you pitch it to them?
Yeah, I think like it probably comes down to a few things um like let's say that usually there's like a kind of communication barrier between like designers and developers and probably even products you can include in there, but they
Mhm.
all have to sort of align on what's in the app, like what's in the design, and like find a way to like validate that those things are matching up, right? And usually it's not that simple to do that. Like, let's say that you come out with like the designer comes and tells you, okay, here's the typography we're going to do for our app, like coming back to that font example you gave. And you're going to go, okay, well, I've added the typography and here you go, like here's the app. And if they're just like looking at your app normally, right, like how are they going to find every single like version of that like typography that they've generated? Like let's say they gave you like semantic
Yeah.
versions, right, like semantic like classes or whatever, like they're saying, oh, this is the title typography, this is the subtitle typography, etc. And how are they going to go through? They're going to have to like find specific places in the app and then like look back and forth between like Figma and see if that's the one that they're looking for, and then say, oh yeah, okay, I think it's right. That's like not a streamlined process, right?
Mhm.
And what you can do with Storybook is you could just add in a story that just shows you every single variant of the typography, right? And you can sort of you could make like a custom story that looks exactly however you want it to be. So like this is something I've done recently, in fact, where like I put in the name of each like typography variant and put in like bit of other information, like the different versions of each of those, like bold and whatever, and just had them like show in one big screen with the scroll view, and then the designer can just like go to that page in Storybook and just confirm, okay, yeah, those are all correct. And she
Mhm.
can, what you can do is even match that to the like canvas in your Figma, right? Like, so if they've laid it out in a certain way, you just lay it out exactly the
Yeah.
same in your story, and they can just go and check like one by one and say, no, that's a little bit too wide. You probably got the font weight slightly off, and you say, okay, yeah, let me fix that. And that's just like you've streamlined that process of that designer having to check your work like by a lot, right? Because they
Yeah.
now don't have to like just either guess or like spend forever like finding specific pieces of UI, right, that
Mhm.
matches what they're looking for.
Yeah. 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 No, I totally agree with you. And, one thing I will state is, and it happened with a client of mine, we did like a V2 on our UI kit not too long ago.
Mm,
And, one of my first pitches was like, okay, time to bring in Storybook so that we have a cleaner way to see the evolution
mm,
of our UI kit, see
yeah.
how the app changes with this V2, right? We're building a whole separate app that's standalone, it's feature flagged. And then, if that user has that feature flag turned on, they get to see the new UI kit and the new implementation of that UI kit. And it worked out great. It worked out great. That was still in that transition phase for that new UI kit, but it's
Mm.
very helpful. It's been very helpful within it.
Nice, yeah. I can really picture that as well. Like like you're gradually implementing the new components, and
Yeah,
maybe like you said, if they're like feature flags, you can even like have each story be like have both of them like side by side, and then you can see them
yeah,
that like that's the thing is like it's so flexible what you can do with Storybook. If you really get into it, you can like have custom render functions. You can have,
yeah,
you can add like all these controls, and you can maybe have just like a Boolean flag to just turn it from the old one to the new one. Like all kinds of different approaches you could take, and you can match it really to like your use case and like solve a like real problem for you. Like, oh, we have to show off like these new
exactly.
changes with this component, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's, I'll say this one more time, and that's it. Like, it's also very important to mention that, like, this, like, Storybook is almost so okay. Let's take a step back a little bit. When we're developing,
Mm,
we're basically building our Lego pieces that'll eventually kind of be put together to build our app, right?
yeah.
Um, and I've been building a lot of Lego pieces with my son, so I feel like this is the perfect analogy for me. Right? You have the little Lego pieces like button, text, and
Yeah.
whatever. You put them together, and they start to come together with like your components, and then eventually, when you're done, it's like your screen almost, right? And in simplest terms, Storybook is just that way for you to do testing, right? It's basically your UI
Yeah.
testing tool at the end of the day, also because if I have a new component and my component, let's just say I'm doing an e-commerce app and it's um, menu row, and it's like my row item where you have the image, the title, a little bit description of or ingredients, and then the price and maybe calories underneath it, right? How does that look? What's the shadow on that? What text are you using? What's the size? How does that scale within it? So, you know, that
Mm,
is very important to kind of be able to see that. And then as you change it, right? What does it look like in light mode versus dark mode? All that kind of stuff, right? That's very important.
yeah. And also, with React Native, important to mention, it does it look like on Android and what does it look like on iOS, right? Like,
Precisely, precisely, because those are
yeah,
different
and
between the two.
exactly. And I think that touches on a point that I often forget about, but it's one of those things that like sold me on Storybook in the first place, which is that like unit tests don't feel right for like visual checks or like for UI components. Like outside of, some logic, maybe you have some business logic in your UI component, but generally like, you know, it's hard to actually test that your component actually looks the way that it's supposed to, or like that it does what it's supposed to do without just literally like having a place to see that like visually and like test it yourself and
Yeah,
like check it, right? And
yeah,
I think the next evolution of that is like, okay, integration tests or like visual
yeah,
testing, but like as your sort of unit testing layer in a sense, it doesn't feel right to just like write a unit test and say, oh, the button is red, because it being like red is like the property got set to red is completely useless. It's like,
yeah.
oh, style sheet is working, great, thanks. But
Hmm.
like what you really want to see is like, does it work? Does it do what we want it to do, right?
Yeah,
And I think that Storybook fills a little gap there of being like, okay, let's make it easy to just go through and check each component is the way it's supposed to be.
exactly. Yeah, and here, Trevor Frank's 2000 TV. I love that handle. I found Storybook to be most effective when it includes docs and examples alongside the component library. That's a good point to make, because again, like if your designer or product team is looking
Mm,
at it, having those docs or even just a little note as to what it is very helpful. Darren Wilson
yeah,
asked a good question, and I have a I have a take on that too. Does it make sense to add
interesting.
Storybook at the very beginning of a project or later, like Mazen's example, when it makes sense
Yeah,
to look at the UI kit as a whole?
interesting. I mean, I think this is almost like a philosophical question, or like maybe that's like too strong of a word, but like an architectural thing, or like the way that you lay out projects. So like if you're and this is something that I always do, but like I think when I'm on like a serious project, you know, one of the things that I always say is like, well, like let's say you have a design, well, let's turn that into a design system. That's kind of like the process. Like,
Yeah,
okay, well, if we're gonna have, you know, a sustainable development of this app, like we want to be able to like create our design system and just like be able to basically spin up new screens or like new like compound like components really quickly because we already have all the pieces in place, right? We want to have a uh like an app that looks looks right, that like feels like consistent throughout the whole app, right? So that's like,
hmm,
okay, number one, you want to, let's say that you want to have a design system, and if you're going to have a design system, do it from the beginning, right? Like otherwise, what do you end up
yeah,
with? You end up with a bunch of components that are copying each other, and you end up with that kind of mess that you have to clean up later. So I think if I come at it from that perspective, for sure, I'm putting it in at the very beginning. And, in certain projects, I might be taking it out once I've like got once I have all the components created and there's nothing left to do. I mean, there's always going to be stuff to do, but like you might even find that like after a certain point you don't need it as much, or like
Hmm.
depending on your workflow, right? Like if it's integral to like everything you do, in your development workflow, you'll keep it, right? But I really think that the beginning is the most important part, where you're building out that system that lets you build the rest of the app. And like for me, I think it's the beginning. But maybe after first you set up the repo, and you set up maybe just like the hello world, and once you start building real components, you want to have a storybook in place so that you can make that system ready, right? So that
Yeah.
everything else is just easy. Like once you have a design system, building a screen is like it's easy work. It's like at least the visual part, right? Like there
Yeah.
might be logic there that's more complicated, but with the design system in place, like your work is way easier. I mean, there's like an investment in the beginning, right, to build out that initial system, but once you have that in place, you can really like save yourself time down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. And Darren, from the project I mentioned, we started off with Storybook. We got to the point where we were, net complete with our design system. Storybook lined up with it, matched up with it. And our designers actually stopped using the app and referencing it because they felt, we had reached the right spot. And every time a new component, a new screen came in, the naming in Figma just lined up because, we lined up our files initially with that name. So we ended up stop maintaining that separate app and just let it kind of drop. And then when V2 came around, UIKit V2 came around, I ended up upgrading that, spinning it back up, fixing our build pipeline for it, and then evolving V2 off of that app. The goal is once V2 is completely done, then integrate it in a launch darkly flag or feature flag within the new application, and then eventually, probably deprecate it once the designers and product team stops using it. So that was my how it went with my
Hmm.
project. So I think, keep the chat going, please. Thanks for these great questions so far. Bring more questions so we kind of keep the conversation flowing. Danny, are you ready? Let's move into the demo part. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
So
awesome. So I'll
I'll just
bring.
kind
Yeah,
of, I want to sort of give maybe a slight backstory to this, which is, I started touching on earlier, but which is that basically Storybook back in the day was a kind of, or at least for React Native, Storybook for React Native was in a bit of a state a long time ago, where the project was sort of unclear, like the documentation wasn't clear, and you didn't really know where to go to look for stuff. And the setup for Storybook back then was something that was like a big problem for like a lot of people. And I think that it turned a lot of people off, thinking that, okay, well, like we couldn't get it set up, so we just kind of let it be, and maybe we just made like a screen in our app and we said whatever, right? But I want to sort of quickly show, before we get into some like real like Storybook examples in a more like complete demo app. I wanted to show how we can get set up in like less than 2 minutes, basically. So
nice.
I'll just kind of speed run through this, but the basics of it are that you're just gonna like run like npm or burn or whatever, create, and it's gonna be Storybook. So first I'm gonna set up a blank Expo app, but this could be an app that already exists, that you have, like maybe you have a bunch of components already or a bunch of screens. But just for this purposes of this demo, I'll just create a new one, just so that you know that I'm not just like pulling it out of my ass, basically.
Hmm.
But I'll just give this a second. I'm using Bund, so it's explicitly so it'll be quick. So if
Yeah,
now
blend
I've
is
got an
fast.
app, right?
Yeah, your timer
And
started, Danny.
yeah, okay. So, and then we just do bun create storybook at latest. And this should be literally the only thing that you need now.
Okay.
And with the latest version of Storybook, there is basically nothing else. And I'm just going to select the defaults. And if once this finishes, there'll be a command, and we'll just copy it to run Storybook, basically, and it should all be going. So in this setup, I've run it's just like the default Expo app, right? So
Hmm.
it's going to be Expo Go in this case, but it doesn't need to be. There's no like specific setup that you need to run Storybook. In terms of like, it can be Expo, it can be React Native CLI, doesn't matter. You can use Repack. That's something I've added support for. So now we have this run command for Storybook. I haven't touched any code. All I did was run those two commands. And now if everything goes right, then you should see Storybook show up on your screen on my screen. So yeah, there we go. So
There
right
we
now
go.
it's in dark mode. So that's why it looks like that. But you can see I basically have Storybook already, and I didn't touch any code. So the days of it being like way too complicated to set up, I
Yeah,
believe, are now over.
that's awesome. I mean, I think you were right at 2 minutes, if not under 2 minutes. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I was talking too, so
Yeah,
let's
that.
see. I'll launch it up on Android as well, just to show that it should work for
I mean,
both.
Trevor said it that
Oh,
this is huge. I totally agree with him because the, I
yeah.
remember back in the days when there was a lot of friction in getting it set up and having it all up on your devices, and it took forever.
Yeah, for sure. I
It
mean,
was a
I think
major pain
that
point.
yes, it definitely was, and I think it's also been kind of a battle to get it where it is
Yeah,
because
for sure.
essentially let me make these. I'll make this one light mode so we can see it a bit better. But anyway, you can. It's been a battle because, like, with React Native and Metro, it's not. It's very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
At the same time as being similar to the web, it's drastically different. So, like, the things that are supported, even just like in the Hermes engine or just in Metro, are like vastly different. And like things like the web storybook has its own like app that it runs in. It like just bundles itself up and runs separately from your app. But if you
Hmm.
imagine like if we were to do that with React Native, how can we like be sure that all those components you have and like native dependencies will work?
Yeah.
We literally can't, right? Unless we set up some like crazy complex setup. So the simplest thing that we can do is just like put it inside your app, right? And then that generates a whole bunch of other problems of like how
Yeah.
do we create like a simple way for you to swap between Storybook and your app? Like, or do we put it inside the app? And like all those things led to it basically being a case of, oh, adding it into your app is left as an exercise to the reader kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the experience you would have had is like, there was like a bunch of things saying like, this is what you could do, and like you kind of just have to figure it out from first principles in a way.
Okay.
But now I believe we've come to like a pretty good place where it should work out of the box. But then if you want to do like a more custom setup, you can dig into the documentation, can feed your AI the skill for setting up, and then it can figure it out for you, like, and now you can kind of achieve whatever you want. Um, but also whilst having that sort of simple setup for like the first hello world,
Yeah. So
Um,
in theory, you could have Storybook in your app hidden, and
yes.
then there's a, I don't know, a button or that you long press, or I don't know, tap and long, like you do a Easter egg, like you
Hmm.
long press X number of times, and then all of a sudden it pops
Yeah.
up, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, so I this is it's like one of those things where I've in the past I've been trying to sort of allow or sort of like leave the door open maybe too much to say like, okay, well, yeah, you can do everything, so I don't want to lock you in. And so that's what was a little bit of a difficulty we've had. And now what we've kind of done is gone with a default that comes out of the box, kind of like you just swap between them by running a different command. But it
Okay.
is still possible to just like embed it in your app. And one of the setups I used to do a lot is having it as a screen in your app, and then you can just like navigate to it. So I like with Expo Router, I would make a
Oh,
storybook route, and then I would like wrap it with some conditional, because now with Expo Router, you can kind of have like some logic that says if that route is like even mounted or not.
Hmm.
I can't remember the name of that value, but if on the screen, there's like screen protected or like something like that, stack dot protected you can do,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
and all kinds of stuff like that. But like, yeah, one of the things that you run into is that then you're going to be fiddling with, okay, well, how do I strip Storybook from the bundle when I go to the production version of the
True.
app? And that's something that the like entry point swapping makes incredibly simple, because if you're not even like reaching that entry point, then no code is going in your bundle, right?
Mhm.
So that's one of these things that is really simplified by this setup, and it becomes automatic. And it is also automatic now to some degree with the other setup, but you have to do a little bit more work basically to get there. So what I mean by automatic is there's like a flag in the Metro config where you can just say like, disabled, or it's enabled set to false, and then that just basically says, okay, well, we need to strip out Storybook from the bundle. That
Makes
was
sense.
like a long time coming as well, as one of those things that in the beginning I didn't really have an answer for, but I feel like now we've really nailed that. But I'll just show now as well that this app does also run a like Expo router app, like the basic like default one you get out of the box. So if I just reload both of these, you'll see that the like basic app is
Yeah.
still there,
Nice.
and I can switch back and forth however I like, and it's just a
Wow.
case of like changing this between run start or run storybook, and then I can just reload. And Expo does a really good job now of handling the caching, where like you don't have to reset cache or anything anymore. There was a time where you were having to sort of reset cache to make it like properly swap, but that doesn't happen anymore. So you should just be able to like quickly swap between them.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think like this setup just kind of works now. And I think I'll leave it at that for this part of the demo. I might have spent a little bit more time than I intended to here, but I think it's important to show like, yeah, like
Totally.
this is the new, this is Storybook today. It's not the way that you remember it. If you are thinking about how it was like a couple of years ago, it's no longer like that. So what I'd like to do now is I have another project that is sort of pre-prepared as an example of a storybook, right? And these are kind of like crude examples potentially, like because I just kind of generated some like design system and an app around like this. It's like a it's a fake app. Basically what I've done is I said like, let's imagine what we might do if we had a React Native Porto app.
Okay.
So if people don't know, I organized this React Native Porto meetup in Porto, and I'm just kind of using that as a app idea. You always need some sort of app idea. I think with
Yeah.
infinite.red, you have like the pizza app, right?
Hmm.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And for me, I just, it's like the easy option, right? So I just sort of said to Composer one day, like, okay, make me an app for this. And then I messed around with it for a while, like adding in like expo skills and stuff and trying all kinds of stuff. So if I run now, in this app, if I run Storybook, I should be able to just launch it up. So what you'll see is this project is just another Expo router app, but this is a dev client build
Okay.
to just like enable it to do more stuff, but it's totally not required for anything we're about to see. So I'll just launch it on iOS. I've already built it ahead of time, so we won't have to sit here waiting for that. Although with the recent versions of Expo, it's pretty fast. I don't know if you've noticed
Yeah.
that, but so here we go. I have, in fact, let's start it looking at the app itself before we get into Storybook, and then we can transition into what it looks like in Storybook. So it's a pretty basic app here. We've got like a router tab navigation here. So you can imagine we're a meetup. We have like events and we have members, and then you can click on a member. They have some like details here. And then, I don't think the event details page was implemented, but
Mhm.
you can see there's just like a couple of basic components. We have like an avatar, we have some like tags and, cards and all these little things in here that you could split out into different components. So if you're sort of design system brained, you might already be seeing some things that could be pulled out into stories or into components, right? Like
Yeah.
we have these buttons, they're an obvious one, right? Like there's a link button, all these types of things. So I can also just bring this up on Android just to show that it's not only iOS. But yeah, like basic app, I think it shouldn't be too out there. You
Yeah.
can easily get some AI to generate this for you, which is what I did. So here you go. You can see again the same stuff on Android. There's also like, search in here, using some of the, I guess, let's see, how does it work on here? Oh yeah, it's like some of those like built-in navigation searches,
Yeah.
right? So
With
like
the new liquid
trying to like
glass.
exactly just use all the native primitives, do whatever you want. And so one thing that you'll see is that in this storybook, I don't have like the navigation pieces in the storybook. And that's just because it's a little bit harder to do that necessarily,
Hmm.
because it's sort of living outside of my Expo Writer app, but everything else will be as part of the design system. But so let me restart this and we'll go into storybook mode. And I think one thing I'm going to do is just make sure, yeah, let me turn the UI back on here. So if I reload these, we're now going to get into the storybook. So I'm going to turn it to dark mode because this design system is more of a dark mode sort of design.
Okay.
And what you'll see here is that we have, a series of different stories. So in this storybook UI, we have at the bottom here this sort of menu. When I open that up, we get this story list. And in here, each one of these little items will be a component file, basically. And the individual items inside there will be the stories for each component. So I always like to kind of start with the button. I feel like it's such an obvious example. And so if
Yeah.
I just click through to the button, one thing you'll notice is that both Android and iOS update at the same time when I selected it on iOS. And that's something I'll come back to. But
Okay.
there is a sort of like WebSocket connection here that's driving things and enables you to drive multiple devices from one location, basically, from one like device, either device even. So if I click on either side, you see it update on
Oh
both of
wow.
them. Yeah. So, and if you see here, like I have the primary selected. So the primary button in this case is like a white button because we have a dark system. If I go secondary, it's more that kind of outline button. And then we have ghost, which is kind of like that link button, and delete, so on. And then you can see we've got like stories for large and small. We've got loading states, we've got disabled, and you can already see, for example, here I'm immediately able to see what's the difference between the Android version and the iOS version of this button, right? So like
Hmm.
you're immediately able to see like at a glance how your design system like looks in the different like devices that you support, or I can even open this up on the web, which I'm pretty sure this will work because I don't think I did any sort of custom stuff. And you'll see that this is also, you can see my screen still, right? Because
Yep.
I,
Yeah. You mind
okay.
just zoom in just a little bit?
Yes, okay, of course.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. So you can see the same stuff is also here. So in fact, if I bring back one of those devices, I can click
Hmm.
around on either side, and I'm seeing it, in fact, on all of these devices, web, iOS, Android, and I can now compare, like, what does this all look like in those different systems, right? So like, if I just resize that, oh, and I broke it. Whoops. Okay, well,
Hmm.
something had to go wrong in the demo, of course, but
Right.
let's breeze past that one. But anyway, basically, um, you could see basically all the same setup on the different devices. Like there's a divider, here's an input. So if I want to see like how does the input behave across the different devices, right? Like that's something I can do here. So you can see, like on iOS, it's like this. Sometimes you'll notice with like input components, the padding will behave differently on iOS and Android, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you often have a sort of like platform.os check and like different padding sizes or something on these inputs. And this is where you could easily at a glance say, okay, well, something's up with this input, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to kind of swap back to the view we were looking at before and focus on the Android and iOS parts. But just a second. This one, here we go. So I just drag these over real quick. And let's go and even look at one of these stories as well. So just a second, I will swap to that button again. So here we are on button primary, right? And what you'll see usually in a code base that has Storybook setup is essentially you'll have the component file itself, and that this is just like a touchable opacity thing. You probably don't want to use a touchable opacity in a real app, but just for the demonstration purposes, we have this touchable opacity. It has some different states, right? Like we have primary size, we have label, we have disabled, all that stuff that you're seeing in the different stories.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing them also here as like properties, because it's essentially what's happening is we're just swapping around the values that we're sending there. And then here in your story file, you will have the meta, and the meta is literally just metadata, meta information, so like descriptive stuff about your story. And then here you can define like, oh, the label is text and the variant should be, this is for controls, sorry. But these are also like, these args are kind of like the default values of the props that we send through to your component.
Okay.
So what happens with these is if I add in here like a render function, Storybook will essentially define a render function for you that just takes whatever these args are and passes them as properties here. So whenever this variant arg is set to primary, that's the default value that's going to get set for the component. And so if I show you here, this primary, right? Like I think that's saved, so it should even be updated. That's the render function that's being used right now. Like I've overridden it, and it's basically that's what it does under the hood. But then you can also, even on here, you can like change what this does, right? Like I could override one of these values. So this is when you're coming into like custom uh like features of Storybook. You can
Yeah.
override the render function, like we have these args. So if I go back to how it was, this is that, so I'll just sort of bring it back to add-ons again. So earlier I was talking about how Storybook has this add-ons panel, this way of extending Storybook, and we have some sort of default add-ons or like the base add-ons, and those are controls and actions. And now here on this button story, I brought up the add-ons panel on this little right-hand button here, this little menu icon. And in here, you can see there are a couple of like controls in here for like changing the values. So on both sides, we can see I can change the variant directly in the controls panel without changing the story that I'm looking at. So those stories basically define the default values of everything, but they're totally adjustable in real time with controls as well. So whilst I'm here in this primary button that's by default, I think probably set to medium, and it's got loading set to false, I can still come into the storybook and say, actually, I want to see what that would look like if it was loading and disabled at the same time, and like maybe it's small now, and let's have a look what it's like when it's danger. So I can really quickly just spin through like a couple of the different variants, and this is one of those features that is like pretty integral to Storybook, but not everyone also like feels the need to use controls. And so, for example, if you already defined a bunch of stories, so like I already defined all these different states individually here, I can, if I like, just use Storybook just entirely from these, just clicking through the individual variants. But at the same time, you're welcome to use controls and do it in real time, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where like Storybook has that sort of flexibility to it where I think everyone uses it a little bit differently. And I'll also now just show like here's another feature that I think not everyone uses, but it's sort of integral one that you get with Storybook. If it would, sometimes we encounter these demo issues. So what should happen when I click the button? It should, yeah, here we go. So now we can see it showing up in the actions panel. So you can just kind of like validate, okay, my on press came in with these values, or like if it's an input, you can see what text is coming through. So you can use that to debug some kind of things, or even just to say like, yeah, the on press works for my component.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's a couple other things in here. So if I change this now to the outline button, there's also this backgrounds add-on. So shows like a bad example there. Maybe let's try this one. Okay, so now the backgrounds add-on is like probably like what it sounds like. You can just change the background of Storybook to kind of see what this would look like with different backgrounds. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's that part's pretty self-explanatory. It's handy if you need to see like what this is gonna look like on maybe like a card. So like maybe you could add a background here that's just like this one I have that's called like app, or it could be like surface or something. And then you could say, okay, well, what's this button? Is this button gonna look right when I put it, for example, here, when I put it on secondary, I know it's gonna look terrible on a sort of white background. So maybe we create some kind of uh sort of guideline to not use this one on a
Yeah.
white background, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
This is pretty cool. It's come a long way, Storybook. I remember from the past, and even just the ability to use TypeScript. You can import your types from button, and that way you know exactly what
Yeah.
props you're expecting, which ones are required, which ones aren't, so they can then be used within every single story.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one of the things I haven't really showed yet is that because we have those types there, we also get like autocomplete of the
Yeah.
properties that I can include with args. And you can kind of it will fail like give you like red squigglies if you write the wrong thing, that kind of stuff. And it's all sort of automatic based on TypeScript, right? So you see
Mhm.
the meta here takes in this generic that will basically figure out what these are allowed to be, and that should be all automatic for you.
Awesome.
And like I said, like that works just here because it's a simple like TypeScript button, and you've got all these properties here defined, and all those args, they just match like one-to-one, basically.
Cool.
Yes. So now I mentioned about those things syncing up. So I thought now I might come back around to that. And so one of the features that we have with Storybook is that there is or React Native Storybook especially, we utilize this sort of WebSocket connection that you have to like turn it on, but
Hmm.
once you have it turned on, it will basically forward all events to all the connected devices. And so with Storybook, there's a sort of central story store, and the way that Storybook kind of updates itself or like does anything essentially is it send out events all over the channel, and the channel is also itself sort of like a WebSocket, and it's just a communication layer. Like if you think about the web, the way the Storybook works on the web is it actually has an iframe in the where the preview is, and then the UI around it is sort of outside of that. And so your preview is like completely isolated from whatever Storybook does.
Hmm.
And in order to do that, you need some sort of communication layer between the preview and the manager, is what we call the like Storybook UI. And so Storybook's really built around this sort of communication layer and event passing. And with React Native Storybook, we've kind of taken that one step further, and we provide like an open sort of entry point for you to connect to the WebSocket that drives Storybook and like replay events or send your own events. So for example, if you want to do testing, you can just connect to this WebSocket and send whatever event you want. And a recent feature there is even you can send REST requests. So you can just send a one-off thing without having to like connect the WebSocket completely. You can just even do like a curl and use like curl, like select story, can't remember the exact name, but then it would just like update all of the connected devices
Hmm.
just by like remotely. And what that will kind of gradually that will help you do as well is use like external tooling with Storybook. So for example, MCP or like AI tooling can just make use of that like directly. If you have WebSockets enabled, you can just tell your AI, okay, here's the endpoints for Storybook, and here's how you can look at Storybook. So you can use something like agent device to like have the agent like really see your what's on your like phone on the device itself, and then it has the ability to change what's there by just sending an event over the WebSocket, right?
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, I feel like maybe I'm talking
Wow.
like a million miles an hour here, but
No, you're
um
good. Yeah, this is exciting stuff. I mean, just the ability to have, everyone's leveraging MCPs now. Even if you think about like
yes.
Maestro's MCP, like the ability to test, right? You could basically tell it to tap and listen to the WebSocket and
Mm,
do your end-to-end test, for specific components, what have you. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that's really the idea. I mean, like as we move forward now, I think everything we're gonna be trying to make accessible to agents, and
Yeah.
this is just another one of those layers to that. And like I think there's a sort of visual way as well that I can show this feature in a that where you can sort of picture how this works. So one thing that you'll be able to see now is that there's actually a Storybook extension I've created for like VS Code and Cursor.
Hmm.
And if I just make sure this is connected, what I've done here on the devices is I've just sort of hidden the UI. So you'll notice there's a sort of full screen button here. So you can tap that and just hide away the Storybook UI. And you might have thought, oh, it's kind of cumbersome to like navigate through this bottom sheet. It's kind of annoying if I just want to like quickly like go through every single component. Well, you have like another solution. Like I said, you can control everything remotely. So if you notice, I mean, I need to reset well, let me just reset the
The
controls
background.
here. So yeah,
Oh,
there
yeah.
we go. So you can see now I'm just clicking through on the cursor extension
Hmm.
and the stories are all updating in real time. And another thing you'll notice if I change it on the device, it's also updated what's selected there. I mean, I'll have to the extension maybe needs a little bit of work, but you can see it's now connected and it's selected the events list component
Oh,
over here
wow.
as well. So there's another like way that you can utilize that like remote connection is just like getting around the Storybook UI kind of thing. And another sort of step up from that, or sidestep, I guess you could say, is if you bring up your DevTools, you can, if you've heard of Rosinite, Rosinite is basically DevTooling plugins for like React Native's DevTools. And I've added a Rosinite plugin, which can also connect to these,
Hmm.
um, to the like WebSocket. And now here you can also control everything from here if you like. So this is a way of like providing that to all of your developers because they can literally just open up the DevTools and this will be injected in there. And so anyone will have
Nice.
access to do this. And then you can like remotely control your storybook. And right now it's limited to just changing the selected story. But I mean, if people were really interested in it, I could add in like the controls and stuff because like one thing you'll notice is that anything I change is like sort of propagated to everywhere. So
Yeah.
they're all events. So like the controls could even be added, for example, to these extensions, or people could build community tooling around it because it's just like an open WebSocket or REST endpoint that you can do whatever you want with, right? So that's like
Mhm.
another factor of React Native Storybook that I think is a bit lesser known, but like has a lot of potential, especially for like testing tooling. Like if you want to use Maestro, Maestro has a feature that lets you run a little bit of JavaScript, and in that JavaScript you can call fetch. So you can actually send a HTTP like REST request to Storybook's WebSocket and have it update the story, and then
Mm.
basically just go and like have Maestro like take a screenshot, for example. And then you can create your own like screenshot testing using Storybook without having to like navigate through the Storybook UI or through any UI. You know, you can fully turn off all of the Storybook UI, in fact. So if I just set on device UI to false, then there isn't even that little button there that like says that for the like full screen and whatever. So like uh super flexible is kind of what I'm getting at, and
Hmm.
there is this sort of WebSocket feature that can drive a lot more sort of interesting use cases, I think, for Storybook.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's a lot of cool stuff there. Can you use it without what do you say? Resonate?
Yeah, that without Resonite, I don't. Well, you could use it without Resonite. I haven't made a plugin that works outside of Resonite. Like I don't like messing with DevTools is not like super straightforward. There isn't like a simple way of just like plugging in stuff to DevTools. That's why
Okay.
Resonite was kind of created, I guess. But you could do all kinds of stuff. Like you can make just like a web UI that you load on the side and have it like send requests to Storybook, or like have it like connected to the WebSocket and react to events. All this code is like open source as well, so like literally anyone can just point their agent to it, say like, like build me a Storybook control panel and like have it do all this stuff. And yeah, like it should be doable whatever way
Okay.
that you want to use it. It's built to
Awesome.
be extensible, I guess, is what I would say. And to enable this, I'll just like be super specific. You should go to, so with Storybook, we have this kind of Metro config sort of extender, and it's called with Storybook. With the newer versions, this is the path that you would use. This is the one that has the automatic entry point switching. And when you wrap your config with this, it has a couple of options. And the way that that switching works, I'll just like mention it real quick, is if you have this environment variable, Storybook enabled, set to true, then Storybook will be the entry point. If it's set to false or not present, then it will be your app or whatever else is there, right? So in here, there are a couple options. The one that is important for the WebSockets feature, and the simplest way to use it is to just say auto mode, and this will like generate some values. One of the problems we used to have in the past is that we couldn't, like when using Android or like especially like a physical Android device, trying to connect back to
Yeah.
your computer, the only way to basically make it work is to just put your local IP address in there.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it will just like get it wrong every single time. And so what that will just do is like it'll just generate this file and like plug in your
Okay.
IP address here, and it's a local one, so there wouldn't like this is as safe to share because no one's on my local network, right?
Fair enough.
So, and there's also like some options there, but I won't get into it. But this file here, the Storybook requires, is generated whenever like config changes, but it's not required to regenerate it like almost never, right? Like it will automatically regenerate when you start up Storybook, because this with Storybook function will rerun that generation every time that Metro starts up, basically. So
Yeah.
that's just a note there to how that works. And yeah, once you have this auto mode set up, your WebSockets thing can now work, but you also need to, unfortunately, also enable it here. This will help to like streamline this,
Hmm.
but right now you just need to sort of enable it in both these places. So you got to say enable WebSockets and WebSockets auto. And that is in the docs. I don't
Fair enough.
know if people know this, but there is now a React Native Storybook set of docs, like separate from the regular Storybook docs. It's a little
Okay.
bit more like under the radar because I haven't been able to spend like significant time on like really like ironing out the kinks there. Like I think it needs a bit more work, but the information I feel like is all there. It just needs some work
Yeah.
massaging the octopus to make it like easier to go through and like understand what you're looking at. But anyway, I think that should sort of cover how you set that up.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just run back real quick and show that there is an MCP inside of Storybook now. And this is sort of automatically included with the newer versions of React Native Storybook. And all you need to do to actually use it is to set experimental MCP to true. And what that does is the same server that serves the WebSockets connection and that like REST connection has like a route on it that is just like MCP. So it will be like localhost 7007, and then it will be like MCP. And then all you have to do is like point your MCP to that. So like you'll see here, I have it's set up here to say like
Hmm.
localhost 7007 MCP. And if I were to bring up the chat panel here, I can say then like, okay, I don't know, tell me what Storybook MCP tools we have. And then I guess it can just tell me that. I think it can.
Should be able to.
And yeah, I mean, let's hope that it works, demoing and everything. Yeah, here we go. So you have list documentation. This basically tells you about all the stories that you have and will tell you like information that we can discern a bit about your story, basically,
Hmm.
because we have like static analysis. So one thing about Storybook, this syntax, is that it's totally static, and any sort of external tooling can analyze that at like build time. So we can say at any one point, like, oh, you have this many stories, this component has these properties, and we can sort of generate some documentation around that, and that's what this will do. And then we have one to like get the individual documentation about a specific component. And then I guess select story is also builds on top of that like WebSocket connection. So
Yeah.
you can actually update the story directly with the MCP.
Hmm.
That one's specific to React Native Storybook because of that sort of WebSocket connection we have there. And then get Storybook instructions is kind of just like a description of how to write stories for the agent. So I could then, for example, just say like select the primary button story, and it should be able to do that, assuming it's not going to mess me over. So you can see here, it just
There we
ran
go.
it. Yeah, so it just said, okay, what's the components we have? It's able to find that there's a button with all these different, yeah, it's probably in there somewhere. There's a lot of components in this one. So, and then it just runs the select story command with the MCP, and that's some small part of what could be your sort of developer workflow with agents, right? And
Yeah.
if you bring into the picture like agent device, which is a tool from Callstack that lets you basically with your agent, it's a CLI tool, so you can run it on your own or with an agent, and it can like uh, basically look at your device, Android or iOS. It can look at the like accessibility tree, and then sort of make click on things, scroll, do whatever you want with it, basically. And it doesn't need any setup. It works if you know about how like Maestro works.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to that, where it has like a test runner. And so if you bring that together with the Storybook tooling, you kind of like you can think of all the possibilities basically. Like you can tell your agent, okay, we want to build the button component, or I don't know, like some card component. And when you press this button, it should do this. And then you can say, okay, well, build a story, and then select that
Yeah.
story, and then click the button and see that it does what it's supposed to, and use the screenshot tool and agent device to say, oh, does it match the design? Maybe I give it a Figma design.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thanks for showing all that, Danny. That's a lot of helpful information, and there's
hopefully
a
not too
lot.
much overwhelming to overwhelm
No, not
everyone, but
really. No, no, not for me at least.
okay,
I got some stuff out of it, and
perfect.
I think the main thing is I'll be able to kind of take this back to, client and
Mm.
other, learnings and projects that I'm currently working on.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think, for our listeners or anyone that watches this later, please share what you build with this, how you use the MCP or even just the WebSockets. I'm sure Danny would appreciate that. I would kind of appreciate to see all that.
Yes, definitely. Any bug reports or anything would be greatly appreciated. Like, I want to make the experience better. If you run into some issues, like maybe the instructions aren't good, or like some fails in some scenario, message me, make a GitHub issue, whatever. I'll be happy. I try to respond to everything that I get, like through GitHub, through Discord. So I will respond to your question, assuming I don't get like a million. But usually it's manageable, and I can respond to everyone. So yeah, hit me up if you have anything.
Yeah, I also want to revisit a question Trevor had earlier. How have you
Mm,
seen Storybook for React Native deployed in large orgs where not
mm.
everyone has a Mac or iPhone they can use for testing or even a company device?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think that question is more almost even like a React Native question in general, because you'll have that same problem anyway if your like developers are trying to make like apps for iOS and they don't have a Mac, right? Like
Hmm.
Storybook just kind of lives in that same world of, well, we run on iOS, so you're gonna need an iOS thing. But one thing I would say is like Expo has all kinds of tools for this, like EAS can build your app for you, so all you need is the iPhone device, really. And so like let's say that um you can just make the build with EAS like workflows, and then so if they have an iPhone, they can like download it, the latest update whenever if you do an Expo update over the air, or you can ship an app to test flight with Storybook in, and that's one of the easiest ways to like share a Storybook with like designers or whoever, is to just like ship a test flight app that's just for Storybook. And then if they don't have an iPhone, I mean, you can use some sort of tooling that lets you use like iPhones remotely. Like you could use something like Browser Base, or like Device Farm from AWS or something. And assuming that they can get the build on there, then that's something they can do. But generally, I mean, at least buy your designer an iPhone is what I would say.
I agree with that. Yeah, make sure the designer and the product people have both devices to use. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
should be like a prereq for people that are large stakeholders within the organization. Totally
Hmm.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're building a serious product and you're not like a one-person team or something, it's important that everyone's able to validate the changes you're making. I think like any developer should also be regularly checking on real devices what they're building. And like it's just important that everyone in the organization is able to do that. And if that, maybe they don't need necessarily have a MacBook to do the builds, but as long as you can get a build to them that they can run on a real iPhone, I think that's important for sure.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Storybook is a great tool that I think everyone should be using, specifically, for showing off what you're building, right? This beautiful UI and UX that everyone on here is building. Have a way to kind
Mm,
of show it off to your team internally in ways to validate it. And also, if you're looking to upgrade your UI kit, it's a great tool to use and leverage. And everything Danny kind of showed off, the WebSockets, the MCPs, it's getting easier. And even just the setup, right? The 2-minute setup, I think, first of all, kind of blew my mind to start off the demo. And then even just the ease of use of it, it's come a long way. And I think it coming a long way kind of goes testament to you, Danny. Thank you for putting the time and effort into that, because it's now easier to use and lowered the barrier of entry, which I think is very important to mention, and makes it easier for us to use. Because, like I said earlier, biggest issue was just the standing up of the app and maintaining that and keeping that set up.
mm,
Now is just side by side with
yeah.
your application, so it's much cleaner within there. So appreciate that.
Yeah. And shout out to Norbert, who also helped with that setup process
Yeah.
recently. That's a recent change that Norbert was like heavily involved in. He's one of the core Storybook maintainers, and the CLI setup is really in the main Storybook repo. And so we've sort of collaborated to make that new setup flow a lot more seamless. And so it's very recent. It's like probably 10.4 where we've got the real seamless flow setup. So that's in a big part thanks to him as well. But yeah, I
Awesome.
mean, it has been a battle to get Storybook for React Native where it is today. So I wouldn't talk that down, but it's also been, in collaboration with some other guys that have helped me along the way for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it shows. That's great. Well, before we close off, I'd like to ask you a couple rapid fire questions. I'd like to kind of wrap up
Yeah,
our show with these. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Cool. What music or song do you like to have playing when you code?
That's a good one. There's some Brazilian music I've been kind of listening to on repeat recently. This guy, João Gomes, has an album called Dominguinho, which is like Little Sunday,
Okay.
and it's great. Honestly, like especially the first one, I really loved that one. I went to see them live not long ago, but it's very chill and Brazilian style. And
Cool.
my wife has really like got me into the Brazilian music and that kind of side of things.
Isn't Anita Brazilian, right? She's a
Anita.
some
Oh yeah, the sing. You mean like the singer, right?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, she is.
Okay, yeah.
She is, but she's recently been doing like so much Spanish music that you wouldn't know.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, some scandalous stuff there with the music industry, Brazilian music industry. Um,
No, Anita's great as
yeah,
well.
no, she's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. What's your favorite movie or what's your favorite recent movie or TV show?
Oh, interesting. Recent movies. That threw me off because, yeah, what's my favorite recent one? Let me think. Man, maybe let's come back to that one. I could tell you that my favorite
Sure.
all time is Blade Runner.
Oh,
But yeah, so especially the original, I really love that one. I mean, I've come to enjoy the newer one as well, but the original was like so good. The director's cut though, because the original had like this weird talking over the top, which was I don't know, I feel like I mentioned this before, but that's the one that always comes to like top of mind.
okay.
But yeah, like recent, oh, man, I don't know. Let
That's
me
it. Let's go
think.
with Blade Runner. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that answer.
Okay.
Cool. Is there a product that you recently discovered that you really love, whether it's an app, a kitchen or home gadget?
Mm. Interesting. An app. I don't really install any apps, right? Like this is that
Okay.
thing. Like I don't think people install a lot of new apps, but what do I really like? Yeah. I mean, I got some really good coffee from Poland when I was there.
There you go.
I
That's fine.
don't know if that
Polish
counts,
coffee. Yeah,
but
that counts.
yeah, well, roasted
Polish
in
coffee.
Poland, but I think the coffee was Colombian.
Okay. Polish roasted coffee, then, I guess, is
Yeah.
the best way to say it. What's your best piece of advice you'd give someone just starting out in React Native?
Wow, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, yes, so I guess the first thing you'd want to do is make sure that you have the fundamentals down. I mean, I think even in the age of AI, like you're not going to get very far if you don't really understand like what you're building on top of.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think you have to understand all of everything. Like, you don't need to understand like you don't have to write Objective-C necessarily, or like to some degree, like you probably want to know like the basic syntax of like Swift and Objective-C, but the more important thing is like, do you understand like JavaScript? Do you understand like React? And do you understand what React Native is and how it's like different to React and like how it connects in with those other layers? Because that's just gonna like be a massive barrier to you otherwise as you get like deeper into it. I think that like
Yep.
there's like layers and layers to React Native because of like it is kind of just that abstraction layer that makes everything easier. But if you don't understand like where it's coming from, like what it actually made easier, you won't really understand like how to tackle those problems that you get when something comes up from like Swift. Like, let's say that your Xcode build starts failing, like you're just gonna be out, like with no clue what to do. I mean, now AI can help you and go a long way, and that's, I think, like probably a way that you can help like inform yourself is to like just like dig into the problems with like Claude or Codex when you encounter them, and just like say like, oh, why does that happen? Like, why does React Native work this way, or like what's causing that? And like the more you can understand that stuff like intrinsically, the quicker you can like get over those problems when they occur, and like the better you can build with React Native, because you really need to understand that like the capability to like hook into native capabilities of like each system is what makes like React Native unique and interesting. Like you can pull in like a native module whenever you need it to do something more like powerful, and otherwise you would just write like a web app, right?
Yeah.
And ship it to both. Yeah.
Totally. Cool. All right. Last question. And this is kind of one of my favorite questions. How can listeners be useful to you?
Interesting. I mean, I think as a maintainer, the answer is always going to be kind of like, you know, make issues, make pull requests, like get involved with the community. If you like what I built, like let me know. I mean, that's always something that like it's great to hear from like people who, you know, it like makes it worth it when someone comes up to you and
Yeah.
says like, "Oh, like thank you so much for doing this. Like I do this with it, and like tell me about like what you're using it for, or like what's missing so that I can make it better." Like, I heard from a bunch of people at like App.js, for example, telling me about some of their workflows, like this, the Kim, the guy who plays the saxophone.
Yes.
He was telling me about a really cool workflow that he has, and I was always really happy. And then he uses the like React Native Web setup that I created, or like the framework for Storybook for React Native Web, and
Mm-hmm.
he has his designer in the like web Storybook using like Claude code to like add to their design system like directly using Storybook, using that like React Native Web setup. And that was just like really cool to hear about, and it sort of also gives me like that like signal that that's a good direction to continue going down, or like just getting that feedback can like help inform me about what I should be like focusing on, stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And I also like to kind of just end things off. Like you're on Twitter, you're on Discord, you're on GitHub, listeners, please, reach out to Danny, as he mentioned, open issues, open pull requests, get involved in the community, ask him questions. And as I said earlier, show off some of the cool stuff that you've built with Storybook,
Mm.
and kind of like we get to see it out in the wild as opposed to, hoarding it almost. So
Yeah, and if anyone's in Porto, come tomorrow to React Native Porto event.
yeah, tomorrow,
We'll
do it.
have coffee and food,
Yes.
and talks.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I want to thank the audience for showing up and asking questions. Thank you so much. It was awesome kind of seeing you all in there. Danny, thank you for coming on the show and demoing. This was a fun episode. I really appreciated it. And congrats to where Storybook is now. It's big for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Anytime, anytime. And please don't forget to subscribe and reach out if you have any topic suggestions or something you'd like me to cover in the future. I have a lot of cool guests lined up, so I'm looking forward to kind of having them on soon, and we'll make those announcements soon. So thank you, everyone,
Nice.
and have a good one. Bye.
All right. Thanks.